Inhaling your own farts is medicine. Let's start here because nothing will ever top this. So, it's 1665. The Great Plague of London is out here killing around 100,000 people, about 50% of the city. Everyone's terrified, and these streets are basically like The Walking Dead, and your doctor, the person you trust with your literal life, looks at you dead in the eye and says, "You need to start saving your farts." Back then, doctors believed in something called the miasma theory, the idea that disease was caused by bad air, and their solution was to fight bad air with worse air. So people were advised to fart into glass jars and seal them shut. And when you suspected you'd been exposed to the plague, you'd crack that jar open and take a deep inhale. If this was today, Ice Spice would have written a song about this. Some people also kept a goat in their house for the same reason. You know it stank in there. Did it work? Obviously not. But somewhere in 1665 London, there was absolutely a man sitting in a room surrounded by neatly labeled jars of his own farts, fully convinced he was doing science. And honestly, we can't even laugh too hard because people are out here selling their own farts online today. Swallowing tapeworms on purpose. Victorian women were obsessed with being thin. Like, the beauty standard of the era was literally to look like you had tuberculosis. Pale, frail, skeletal. The corsets weren't cutting it fast enough, and everyone wanted to be Bella Hadid really bad. So some genius came up with the idea of a tapeworm diet. You would buy a little pill, and inside that little pill was a tapeworm egg. The egg would hatch in your intestines, and boom, the worm would attach itself to your gut wall and start eating whatever you ate. Now here's where it gets worse. Some of these tapeworms would grow up to 82 feet long, and the side effects? Vomiting, seizures, organ failure, brain damage, because some species of tapeworm larvae can literally migrate to your brain and cause cysts. And of course, WebMD did not exist back then, so they didn't even know. The removal process was even more insane. One method involved a doctor shoving a tube with food down your throat to try to lure the worm out. Unless you think this is safely in the past, Khloe Kardashian once said she wished she could do the tapeworm diet. Plus, in 2014, TLC aired Untold Stories of the ER, where a mother fed her teenage daughter tapeworm eggs to help her lose weight for a beauty pageant. So, in a way, nothing has changed, and we're all doomed. Communal butt wiping stick. Well, we hope you've got a strong stomach, because yes, this one might actually be worse than sniffing your own farts. We live in a fairly privileged era when it comes to butt wiping options. Soft, triple-ply toilet paper, bidets that feel like a spa day. But in the old times, people were out there wiping with sticks, leaves, grass, animal fur, basically whatever nature slapped within arm's reach. So the Romans came up with what they probably thought was a genius life hack. Take a sponge, put it on a stick, and leave it soaking in a bucket of vinegar or salt water at public latrines. Sounds fine until you realize you're sharing the butt sponge with literally everybody else. Medieval European monasteries had their own version called the Goomp stick. Basically the same concept. A stick with a sponge or rag at the end shared among monks and clergy. You'd use it, rinse it, and leave it behind for the next holy brother. Now I want you to picture a monastery. Quiet, sacred, peaceful. Men who have devoted their entire lives to God and purity. Waking up at 4 a.m. to chant. Copying beautiful manuscripts by candlelight. Absolute devotion to God. And then, all sharing a butt rag on a stick. Human civilization really peaked with indoor plumbing. Taking 2 baths in your entire life. Isabella I of Castile is one of the most powerful women in history. Patron of Christopher Columbus, the queen who helped unify Spain, genuinely one of the most consequential figures of the 15th century, basically the OG Daenerys. And yet, she reportedly bathed only twice in her entire life. Once at birth, once before her wedding. That's it. She believed bathing was sinful, a sign of vanity. And this wasn't just a personal quirk, it was a widespread religious belief at the time that caring too much about your physical body meant caring too little about your soul. But it gets worse. During the Reconquista, when Isabella and Ferdinand II of Aragon's armies reconquered Muslim-held territory, they encountered fully functioning public bathhouses called hammams that had been used regularly by Muslim communities for centuries. Isabella's response was to tear them all down. And it somehow gets even crazier. According to historical accounts, when Columbus reached the Bahamas and saw the Taino people who bathed daily in the sea, Isabella reportedly told him to discourage this practice. She was so committed to the anti-shower agenda that she reached across the literal ocean to enforce her "I've never showered and neither should you" policy. wiping the king's butt. In the English royal court, there was a job called Groom of the Stool. Yes, that was the official title. And yes, the job was exactly what it sounds like. Follow the king to his portable royal toilet, help him wipe, remove the waste, and handle the whole situation. Noble families actually fought for this gig. Not reluctantly, not as a punishment. They actually wanted it, because the Groom of the Stool had more private and unguarded access to the king than almost anyone else in the entire kingdom. You were alone with him every single day in his most vulnerable moment. You could casually whisper policy suggestions, ask for land, plan ideas, or rumors, or request pardons. Some of the most powerful men in Tudor England held this role. It was genuinely one of the best networking positions in the country. LinkedIn could never. The last person officially held the role until 1901. So yes, wiping royal butts survived longer than some empires. Imagine that on your resume. Crazy. Pulling teeth from dead soldiers to make dentures. June 1815, Battle Waterloo, Napoleon's final defeat. About 50,000 men dead or dying on the field by morning. And before the sun was fully up, scavengers were already moving through the bodies. Not just looking for valuables, but specifically going mouth to mouth with pliers, pulling teeth. Why? Because early 19th century England had a serious sugar problem. The slave trade had made sugar widely available and affordable. Consumption skyrocketed. Tooth decay was everywhere, and dentures were in high demand. And the best dentures, the ones that looked real, fit well, and didn't rot quickly, were made from actual human teeth. Ivory and animal bone options existed, but they looked fake, turned yellow, and made a horrible grinding noise when you chewed. Young soldiers killed in battle were the premium source. Healthy teeth, young, strong, clean, perfect for repurposing. The Waterloo teeth were collected in such huge quantities that they were shipped back to England in barrels, sorted, boiled, as it was the only sterilization method available, trimmed, and fitted onto ivory or hippo bone denture bases. They were then sold to upper-class Europeans who either didn't know or very much knew and chose not to ask where the teeth came from. When dentists did tell patients, they marketed them as Waterloo teeth, which was somehow a selling point, because it meant the previous owner was a healthy young soldier, not a dug-up corpse or executed criminal. Branding really can sell anything. The practice continued well past Waterloo. The Crimean War, the American Civil War, it continued for decades. Historians estimate that many dentures worn by wealthy Europeans through the 1870s contained Waterloo teeth. But here's something even more interesting. Just 2 centuries later, people were doing the complete opposite. In Elizabethan England, when sugar arrived via colonial trade, it was so expensive that only the wealthy could afford it. And since sugar absolutely destroys your teeth, black, rotting teeth became a status symbol. Queen Elizabeth I herself had famously black and rotten teeth by her 60s. And because Elizabeth was a fashion icon and everyone was trying to copy her look, the lower classes who had perfectly healthy teeth because they couldn't afford sugar started blackening their own teeth artificially to look wealthy. So the next time you see a regal 19th century portrait with that polite closed-mouth smile, just know there's a very, very real chance that those pearly whites had a previous owner. We might have everyone flying to Turkey for veneers now, but history was glamorous too. Using crocodile dung as birth control. Starting in Egypt nearly 4,000 years ago, women used crocodile dung as a contraceptive. This is documented in the Kahun Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts ever discovered. The method involved mixing the dung with a paste and using it as a pessary. And here's the funny part, it might have actually worked. Crocodile dung is alkaline, chemically similar to modern spermicides, so it may have had a real sperm-inhibiting effect. Now, jump to ancient Greece and Rome, where they had a different solution, a plant called silphium. It grew wild only in a narrow coastal strip near Cyrene, in what is now Libya. Silphium was used as a seasoning, medicine, cure-all for coughs and fevers, and yes, also as a documented contraceptive. The physician Soranus recommended a monthly dose the size of a chickpea. The demand was absolutely insane. Julius Caesar himself personally stockpiled around 1,500 pounds of it in the Roman treasury, and they used it so aggressively that it went extinct. Some historians genuinely think the heart shape we use today comes from the silphium seed pod, which appeared on Cyrenian coins. The heart emoji, the universal symbol of love and romance nowadays, potentially derived from a contraceptive plant humanity loves so much, we literally ate it to extinction. Rubbing chicken poop on your head to grow hair back. Let me be very clear. This was not one weird guy with one bad idea. Multiple civilizations, across different centuries, independently declared that the solution to hair loss was to slather something deeply unpleasant on your scalp. In 17th century Britain, there was a publication called The Pathway to Health by a man named Peter Levens, basically the men's health magazine of its era. In it, Levens advised men with receding hairlines to take the ashes of culver dung, which is pigeon or chicken poop, and then dissolve it in a strong alkaline solution and wash their heads with it. But Britain wasn't alone. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, developed his own baldness treatment involving a mixture of horseradish, cumin, pigeon droppings, and nettles applied to the scalp. For what it's worth, Hippocrates also went bald, so the pigeon droppings didn't do much. Vikings tried goose poop. Native American tribes used chicken dung or cow manure. The funniest part of all of this is that we now know hair loss is primarily genetic and hormonal. So every single person who ever put pigeon poop on their head did it for nothing. Thank God we now have minoxidil, hair transplants, and turkey. Drinking your own pee was actual medical advice. Urine therapy has a long history across multiple cultures. In ancient Rome, India, and Egypt, urine was used medicinally for centuries for wound care, skin conditions, you name it. Some of these applications have been partially vindicated. Urine is sterile when it leaves the body. It contains some compounds with mild antimicrobial properties. Most applications, however, did not age well at all. Cow urine in particular is considered sacred and pure in parts of Hindu tradition, believed to have cleansing and medicinal properties. So this idea wasn't fringe in its historical context. It had cultural and religious grounding. But the specific moment we're zooming in on is 16th century Venice. A few sips of your own urine daily was seriously doctor endorsed as a preventative measure against the plague. The reasoning was tied to strengthening the body's internal environment against outside contamination. But you know what? Urine therapy never fully went away. There are wellness influencers on TikTok right now in the big 2026 advocating for drinking your own urine as a health or biohacking practice. We have germ theory, we have antibiotics, we have a complete scientific understanding of how disease works, yet someone is still filming a morning routine that includes a mason jar no one asked for. 16th century Venetians at least didn't have Google. That's the only difference. Wearing the same clothes for months straight. King James VI of Scotland, and later James I of England, yes, the very king responsible for the King James Bible that billions of people have read, had what historians very politely describe as an aversion to bathing. He rarely, if ever, washed his hands properly. At most, he would wipe them on a damp cloth and call it a day, but the bigger issue? He wore the same clothes for months at a time and slept in them. Not because he had no other clothes. He was a king. He had wardrobes. He had servants whose entire job was to dress him. He just had a deep personal resistance to changing outfits or washing. Now, it's worth pushing back on the myth that everyone in history was just unwashed and crusty all the time. That's actually a modern exaggeration. Soap has existed for thousands of years. Bathing was common in many cultures, and most people in James's era did care about cleanliness. James just took things to a specific individual extreme, even for his time, which somehow makes this worse and funnier. He had every resource available. He was surrounded by people who could have made him clean, and he was still, by contemporary accounts, deeply unpleasant to stand near. This man was receiving foreign ambassadors, and he stank. And for the record, James was not uniquely cursed in this department. Ordinary people across most of history had maybe 4 outfits, 1 per season, and peasants frequently slept under clothes out of pure necessity, and no central heating means keeping your layers on. The difference is that James had literally no excuse. Wigs were held in shape with animal fat that attracted mice. The towering, ridiculous powdered wigs of 17th and 18th century Europe are culturally iconic at this point. We've all seen the portraits, and yes, they were absurd. But what's less discussed is what was actually holding these architectural masterpieces together. Wigs were structured and shaped using animal fat, usually lard or tallow, as a base to hold everything in form. The fat gave them structure, volume, and that gravity-defying height. The problem was that animal fat goes rancid over time. So while you were wearing the thing to balls, court appearances, dinner parties, and important meetings, it was slowly turning, and rancid animal fat has a very noticeable smell. But the bigger issue is that rancid fat attracts things. Lice were basically universal in this era, not just among the poor, not even necessarily a hygiene issue, just a fact of life before pesticides. So every elaborate wig was basically an ecosystem. But it didn't stop at lice. Historical accounts describe mice nesting in extremely tall wigs, setting up homes rent-free, making life decisions inside someone's hairpiece. The most extreme wigs, particularly fashionable in France and among wealthy English women in the 1770s and 80s, were built over wireframes and could reach 2 to 3 feet high. Some were so elaborate that they were worn for weeks at a time because restyling them was such an ordeal. Just think about what was happening inside that wig over 3 weeks. Rubbing porridge in your armpits as deodorant. Before commercial deodorant, which only became widely available in the late 1800s and really didn't catch on until the early 1900s, people had to get creative with armpit management. One approach, used in Britain and parts of Northern Europe, was to dampen oatmeal or porridge paste and apply it directly to the armpits. The oatmeal would absorb moisture and help neutralize some of the odor. In ancient Egypt, things got slightly more advanced. People would flavor porridge with incense and roll it into small balls, which they then tucked under their armpits. As body heat and sweat broke them down, they released fragrance right at the source. And honestly, that's not the worst. Oats have mild anti-inflammatory properties. It's basically what you'd find in a high-end bath product today. Other historical attempts were less elegant. Sticky plant resins that attracted flies, animal fat rubbed directly onto skin, which, as we've already established in the wig chapter of history, invites things you don't want near your body. Here's the interesting part though. When the first major commercial deodorant, Mum, launched in 1888, it wasn't an instant hit. The idea that sweat was something shameful or socially unacceptable wasn't yet deeply ingrained. It took decades of aggressive advertising campaigns to convince people that they had a problem that needed solving, that they smelled bad, and that it was embarrassing, which means the concept of body odor being socially unacceptable is, to a significant extent, a marketing invention. In fact, companies like Listerine use similar tactics for bad breath. Create the insecurity, sell the product. The cycle is eternal, and we've completely fallen for it every single time. But since we're in modern times, please continue using deodorant. Honestly, people in the past weren't entirely wrong by the logic of their time. They were just creatively trying. Future generations will probably look back at some of the things we're doing right now with the same exact energy we're bringing to this list. We just don't know which things yet. Happy eating. Ciao ciao. Subscribe now.